Always start with a little bit of water.
Oh, that's always good.
You know, another great way to start things that I learned was take an apple and bite an apple before you're about to do anything. So sometimes before I do anything big that I think I'm going to do, whatever I'm on stage type thing, I bite an apple because there's a confidence you get when you bite into an apple.
I like it. How did you come up with that? Is that something that you did on your own?
No, I think I read it somewhere. I forget. And I was like, that apple technique is money. It's great. You just chew. You imagine yourself biting into an apple. You're always confident.
That's really interesting.
Isn't that?
That's a great technique.
It's a great technique.
I'll have to try that.
I didn't do that today. But
you didn't bring an apple with you.
No, I wish I did though. I think maybe it's something I did like the first 10 or 20 times I remembered it. And then you can't always have an apple.
You can't always have an apple.
You know?
Yeah.
Do they give apples out at the city?
They don't. They don't give apples out at the city. But that might be a really great technique, you know? You bite an apple, jar yourself out of the mindset you're in, get some nutrition.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It could be a good cultural shift to start promoting nutrition and healthy eating. And there's always apples available at the city of Santa Monica.
There's always apples. Maybe at the farmer's market.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yes.
See a partnership somewhere down the road.
Yeah. Public-private.
Yeah.
Public-private. So you have spent now a bunch of years at the city.
Yep.
How many? 7, 8?
Almost 8. Yeah. Just shy of 8 years. So that's a while.
It's a while.
Yeah.
You've gotten a lot of experience of dealing with all of the things that a city can possibly deal with.
We've dealt with quite a few these past couple of years. Yeah.
And as the chief communications officer, communications is your forte and what you focused on, and arguably one of the most important aspects of any relationship.
Sure. I think relationships is the key word there. Relationships are so important, not just within City Hall, but building a relationship with the community to build that understanding and tackle some of the hardest issues. Without a relationship, you can't build trust. So relationship is really important.
And how did you start to do that at the city? What were some of the strategic initiatives you employed? And tell me a little bit about how that went and what some of your focus was. And let's get into it a little.
Sure. I mean, I think in some sense I had the easiest job and the hardest job. It was easy because there was no program before I joined the city. You know, when I came to Santa Monica City Hall, there was, I think, a skeletal crew, kind of disjointed, working on communications. And there was a deep need. There still is one now, not just in Santa Monica, but I believe in government in general, to build understanding of some really tough issues. There's a lot of details. There's a lot of nuance. Things that feel straightforward sometimes are not. And so, I was tapped to come and start a program. So how do you build a relationship with a community? There's actual, steps that you can take. One of them was, we had a great Seascape. A lot of people read that newsletter. It goes to every home in Santa Monica. But, print, we were kind of, on the verge of digital when I joined the city. I mean, we had a website, but our social media was, lacking. And people were starting to subscribe to email newsletters and things of that nature. But really, beyond the tactics, it was about building a way to reach people where they are and do it in a way where it was multi-channel, and that we had a direct connection to residents. So that incorporates everything, right? Whether it's having a space on the website where people can go and learn more about information about the things that matter to them, to proactively reaching out, whether it's through media relations, through our local newspapers, or creating great video content, building engaging content on our channels, our TV channels, And then also, social media was this kind of growing, emerging thing when I joined the city. And, some people felt it was all about the numbers, get as many followers, get as many likes as you possibly can. And, we really focused on getting the right viewership, right? So we were super focused on that 64,000 households. How do we get build a communications program that reaches that audience? So whether it's in times of crisis, and we've been through quite a few of those in the past couple of years, all the way through to learning about really exciting new programs and services that residents and people in the community can take advantage of and benefit from. Those things, there needs to be a way and a reliable way that you can reach as many of the people out there as possible, provide timely, factual, robust information, and then let people figure out how they feel about things, whether they want to engage, if the programs and services are right for them. And we've been able to do that over time, and it's been a really rewarding and tough job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember you mentioning earlier that access to information is equity.
Absolutely. Information is power, right? Like if you don't know about something and you don't have all the information that you need, you may make decisions based on, misinformation, lack of information. So having the right information and all of the information is critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that information? So misinformation is a fun word going around right now.
Yeah.
How do you make sure, or what are the factors that determine what information is misinformation?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a big difference between opinion and fact, right? And that's prevalent in our society today.
Right.
I mean, that's much bigger than Santa Monica or my job or City Hall.
Most people have a different definition for the word fact.
They do.
Which is the problem, I think, in a lot of ways.
Therein lies part of the problem. I think that's why I think, some people feel that government shouldn't have a voice and shouldn't have an opinion, right? But government is comprised of people, and the people that work there, myself included when I was there, we have thoughts and ideas and perspectives, right? So there is a space for that. That's why, I think blogs and some social media content, it's really important to be able to produce those thoughts. It's all part of building that relationship, right? So if you know me and my views and what's driving me to make some of the decisions or recommendations that I'm doing, then it may help further that dialogue and build that understanding. If it's just fact-based, that might be a little bit more of a challenge. The trick that I found is that it's hard to keep those two things parallel and not always, entwined. And I think there's space where some press releases and information on the website has to be straightforward and fact-based. And then there are other times where that opinion, that expertise, the reasons why are also really important. So figuring out ways in proper channels to be able to do those two things and that people can recognize the difference between those two things is a really important component of what we set up at City Hall.
Can people recognize the difference between those two things?
I hope so. I mean, that's a loaded question, Evan. But I mean, as far as the program we set up,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Press releases, other than people's quotes, which we never edit, were fact-based primarily. Yeah. And then where we took some liberties and shared points of views was through our blog.
Yeah.
And if you go on the city's website, those two things are very clearly identified as separate things, right? Yeah. And so I think it's important to be able to digest both of them.
Yeah.
And then, factor both opinion and fact into it, even if it isn't your point of view, and then be able to figure out how you feel about something and where you sit on an issue.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good strategy, and I'm interested to learn how people perceive that. Right. I'm definitely interested to learn like when, and I always get hung up on the opinion versus fact thing because it's so tricky. And I do believe one person's opinion is another person's fact in a lot of cases, and how they make cases for things, how they show up at council meetings and talk about things. Right. And take up those 2 minutes of time, or if they're on council and talking about it for more than 2 minutes.
Right.
So, it's a good line to draw, and it's nice that you've drawn it. It is nice that you've drawn it.
Yeah. And I think the important thing is it's helpful to have both, right? I think there's a danger in living in absolutes, one or the other, never this, always that. I think you have to, we're all humans and we are imperfect, or should I say perfectly imperfect. So being able to, know and identify when you're getting opinion and when you're getting fact, being able to take both those things at face value and then be able to formulate your own opinion on things. I mean, that's the beauty of democracy, right? Like it's part of why, even though government wasn't part of my professional career path plan, why I felt compelled to take this job and do the work that we've done over the past almost 8 years is being able to engage as many people as possible and then have them be part of that decision-making process. Know that their voices matter, their opinions matter, even if I don't agree with your point of view. Having difference of opinion, difference of thought, that's what makes, I think, democracy work. If we all think the same, if we all look the same, if we all act the same, it might be easier in one sense, but you may not get the results and be able to advance what you're trying to achieve. It takes bravery to think outside the box, to go against the grain, and to advocate for something when you're the minority.
Sure.
So I think those things are such an important part of why democracy works in America. I think we spend a lot of time focused on the people we disagree with. And I think even in Santa Monica, maybe especially in Santa Monica, what I found is that if we spend more time thinking and acknowledging what we all have in common and the things that are our connective tissue, that the things that we don't agree on don't feel as big and as overwhelming, maybe, because when you think about it from a human relationship, if I can say to you, Evan, like, hey, we have 10 things in common and 2 things that we disagree on or maybe don't see eye to eye on, then those 2 things may be really important things, but I'm also balancing the other 10 things that
it's weighted.
It's weighted.
Right.
Absolutely.
And if you don't do that weighting, you end up thinking that people are just against each other.
Correct.
And it's really not the case. I do believe that people have more in common than they have that they disagree on. And council actually would say that too, probably, because they seem to be unanimous on most of their votes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think where it gets a little tricky is sometimes you and people can agree on broader level of a topic, and then once you dig a little bit deeper,
like in the approach,
how we do things is, I think, almost as important as what you do, right? I mean, that's both from my culture, also from how I have approached my work, right? Like, if you want to get results, but the way you get those results is not in line with, consensus building and relationship building and trust.
Or values.
Then you might be successful, but you might be alone in that, right? So I think it's super important to factor those things in as you're making decisions, as you're approaching your work. And where we started this conversation, relationships, right? That's what's kept me in Santa Monica for as long as I've been here is the relationships. I think about all of the great things that we've been able to accomplish, most of it was based on the fact that we had trusting relationships. And I still believe that trust is still there. And I'm super hopeful for the future there.
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot in a just under a decade.
Well, I spent almost 8 years in City Hall, but before that, I spent almost half my life working in one capacity or another for the community. So I have a deep-rooted, passion and love for the community. Probably spent more time in Santa Monica than in my own home. So I guess that's a different definition of community member, right? So I might not be a resident of Santa Monica, but I've spent more time there than I did in my own home for maybe the last 20 years.
Yeah, clearly you have a passion for it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about what you were doing before this. Give some context.
Sure. I mean, I spent about 9 years as the vice president of downtown Santa Monica. I joined that downtown bid when it was Bayside District Corporation. It was a tiny little, business improvement district, and was able to join at a really exciting time where they were just about to establish the property-based assessment district. And with that shift, there was a lot more ability to do much more sophisticated outreach and marketing, enhanced cleaning, definitely more advocacy for the area. So I was fortunate enough to be there during a time where we kind of went from a small, primarily 3rd Street promenade to, a thriving downtown district. And then prior to that, I spent about 8 years working for the Santa Monica Travel Tourism Office, doing marketing there and destination branding and placemaking. So that was really helpful as I came to City Hall and started thinking about how to best reach the Santa Monica community. And I had a lot of, I think, understanding and context of the needs of the community. And there are some things that we've done really well and other things that we still have a lot of room for improvement. Yeah. So
what are some of the things you see that we can still do better in now that in either during your time or in hindsight? Where do we need to go?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. And I think I'm going to stay in my lane and focus mostly on outreach and communications, right? There is a really, I think, gap in understanding of what that means. It's very logical. If I spend a lot of time with you, Evan, getting to know you and telling you about myself and about my thoughts and why I feel the way I do, then you build that trusting relationship. But that takes time. It may take resources, and it doesn't happen overnight, right? So that's part of what I think we have a lot of opportunity to grow. We don't always invest enough, and certainly not at the right time, in doing that kind of outreach. And I think that's an area that the city could really take more of a closer look in. Most companies spend anywhere from 5 to 10% of their annual budget on outreach. Government is a service organization, so we don't build widgets, we don't sell anything. We are there in service to the community. And if the community doesn't know about the services and programs and policy decisions that are being made, it doesn't have to be about convincing people that we're right. It's about, what we talked about earlier, information is power, right? If you have the information, you're able to engage in a different way, and you're able to, maybe drive change. Those are very powerful things in the society that we are in. And so I think we don't always invest in those types of outreach and communication strategies. A lot of times, and it's not just isolated to Santa Monica, you you invest the money once you have a problem or when something is misunderstood. Imagine a place where people actually have information to begin with.
Right.
And it may not change the full outcome. It may not even change, your opinion on it. What it might change is how you feel about how the services were provided, how that policy decision was made, how it impacts me. I think that's, again, it's very similar to just basic human relationships. If I tell you something is happening before it happens, it may not change the end result, but it might change and have an impact on how we feel about each other.
Right.
That I trusted you enough and I shared enough with you in advance so that you weren't left wondering why at the end and speculating, right? So I think that part of not just government, but just, any business needs that type of investment.
Do you think the city, all the residents of the city know that pure sentiment? Because that's beautiful. And sometimes I think that when I get, for example, some things from the city that feel like city things.
Yeah.
They feel like just pure information. It's usually some sort of legalese, maybe something about, the store going up with a liquor license that you need to, you have an opportunity to, it's like on a white card.
Right.
But, and then other times I do really feel, even in like the Seabreeze, for example, that there really is a deep, there's a warmth to it. And do you think that people, or are they beginning to start to understand that there are people in the city just like you, and that they care, and really what you just said, and to make them feel that you're connected to this in a meaningful way, and that you're trying to give them all the information. And are they reacting differently? Or are they saying, oh, wow, okay, I see that at least they're trying to, communicate this to me in an effective way? How do you even measure something like that? Sometimes it's tricky, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways from a marketing standpoint that you can measure that. You can poll, you can ask. I think there's been a lot of conversations around market research and building that understanding. But I think it depends on who you're trying to reach and who you're trying to poll, right? There are people who are very engaged and who remain engaged, which is great. And then there are other people who don't have the ability to, whether it's because they're, busy working, they don't have childcare, you can't always make it to a city council meeting. And so knowing different ways to reach those audiences, I think, is really important. I think I'm very fortunate that I got to work with such caring and really intelligent people at City Hall. And Santa Monica, despite, what some of the opinions I've heard, I can say that I've been fortunate to work with some of the brightest people in public service, right? And, you may not agree on the approach. You may not agree on the end result. The one thing I can say, based on my experience, is that there are a lot of people at City Hall that care so much about the community, they take pride in the work that they produce. They're experts in their field. And, there's a basic level of respect that should come with that, even if there's disagreement on the why or the what, right? So.
Yeah, I, one of the purposes of originally creating this podcast, video podcast thing was my frustration with the anger, right? And that people will seemingly, regardless of how much they have in common, they will focus on the one thing that they disagree on, and they'll say mean things to each other. They'll name call. They sometimes do like even preschool-like behavior
Yeah.
where you'd be like, that's not how we treat each other. And
Right.
that doesn't, and I see it a lot. And when I was the president of the Ocean Park Association, this was one of the
Sure.
rules that I had, is like, you come in here and you speak nicely to people. You
Yeah.
don't have to agree with it, but this is not a place where we yell at each other.
Right.
And there tends to be there's a stigma around that in a lot of organizations. And that was one of the things I wanted to really change. And I've been harping on it now for a long time. And I guess a lot of, what the opportunity is
Right.
to get people to say, well, I have the information. I see that there's another person on the other side of there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to yell at them and be angry at them. They're a person too.
Right.
And when we're talking about communications,
Yeah.
it's like, it's really the epicenter of the opportunity
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to contribute to the many people who live here. So I'm always just thinking, and I've seen a lot of it. I know a lot of it has improved while I've been there. So it's a good sign. Yep. Which is great. And I guess all we can do is hope that people continue to take, just be cautious about how you speak to people. Be kind.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You started with the word anger, right? And I don't think being angry is bad. I actually think anger is driven by passion when you feel really strongly about something. I think what you do with that anger matters. Right. And I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier about the how you do something, right? So if you don't agree with somebody, you can be angry about a situation or about a topic. How you choose to then express that anger and what you do with that energy is really important. If you want to let that anger fester and it becomes personal and you make personal attacks, I think that's a choice. On the flip side, if you take anger and it can drive change that really can benefit a lot of people, right? So I think, again, that goes back to how you approach something and how you do something can make a huge difference in who's standing next to you and behind you as you make those changes and strive for that in your work, right? So I've seen a lot of dissatisfaction with, either with government, with politicians, with different neighborhood organizations, different groups. I think all of it is important as we talk about engagement, civic engagement, and everybody deserves to have their opinion. If I didn't believe in the First Amendment, I don't think I would be able to have done the work that I've done for sure. Almost a decade of my life. But, I think the outcomes matter. And, at the end of all of that, if you've just hurt someone's feelings, that's an outcome. But if you use that anger or that passion to actually drive necessary change and improvement, and work with people, right, I actually think over time you're building a stronger foundation for a better place. And I think that's the connective tissue, that top line. What do we all have in common? We all want a really great place that we can be proud of and that we connect to, right?
I'm glad you made that differentiation, because the spectrum of emotion is something that is human, right? It's a human thing. That's not that's not something you can really get rid of necessarily, but allowing it to process and doing something constructive. Yeah. Right. Just one of the things is like at the simplest way is like if something bad happens to you in a day, you wouldn't go to the coffee shop and yell at the person selling you a coffee. Right. Something happened and it stinks, but you wouldn't want to project that energy outward to the rest of the world. Right. And that's a microcosm of, I think, when we're dealing with bigger issues. It's like, okay, we see there's a real issue here. And there a lot of times that anger, or I want to say all the time, that anger is coming from a good place most of the time. Try not to make universal statements. Generally speaking, that anger is coming from a place that's important. You're feeling something that really needs to be addressed, and there's a real reason why it's bothering you. It could be safety. It could be something family-wise, historically, that's bothered you. It could be the future of the way you've seen things happen in the past and you don't want it to happen again. But if it's not put forth in the right way, then what happens is it just goes on deaf ears very often, right? Because now if you go out and yell at somebody, then they first put up their block, right? To say like, I'm not, this doesn't even penetrate yet. I have to first realize that you're yelling at me and to not take that personally and then absorb what you're saying and seeing if there's truth in there. And sometimes you only get 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do that when you're back to back in 2-minute public comment is, I guess, what I'm referring to in this particular case.
Sure.
But if you only have 2 minutes and your goal is to make a point, then kindness is going to be the way to go because
for sure.
Even if you're angry. And so that's really what it is. It's how do we convert that at that moment where people have to make that really solid point or tell that solid story and still be kind, even though sometimes it's hard.
Yeah. And I think that's all part of, again, there seems to be a central theme here of relationships, right? So if you're really upset and you want to say what you want to say and you've got 2 minutes to do it, you can say your piece, have that mic drop moment, and then leave, right? But when you're in a community and you're working on multiple issues and you've got long-term investment in, the place that you live and send your kids to school and, live your life, then you need to be thinking about the long plan too. You need to know that what you're contributing in those 2 minutes isn't the end all be all, right? There's going to be that next time or that next issue or that next program or service that you're going to be advocating for. So I think those are things that are really important. And I think that's why ongoing dialogue, ongoing communications is so important, because there's a lot of times where people read about something or learn about something and they may not act, right? But the next time that there is a moment that they want to act, there's all that history of information and dialogue that's there waiting for them.
It's hard to separate sometimes.
It is. It is. And you're right. It can be helpful. It can also be hurtful.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for us but it's better for it to be there than not, right? I mean,
you have to hear the stuff.
You have to hear the stuff.
You have to hear it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you were to give one, I'll say piece of advice to other cities.
Other cities.
Right? You said, this is what I've learned and this is what I recommend all cities do.
Yeah.
What would that be?
That's a big question. I don't know if I have the exact answer. What I can say based on my experience is invest in good ongoing communications. You can't just invest in it when things are wrong or when you want to prove a point. There needs to be relationship between community, and it goes beyond just residents, right? Businesses, organizations, nonprofits. You need to have that direct relationship. And that takes time. It takes investment. It takes resources. But if you have that built trust and understanding, even if when the times get tough, that's when you can kind of rely on that to get you through to the other side, right? So there's been lots of times. The pandemic is a perfect example. We spent a really long time sending out information. Even though LA County was sending out information, the state obviously was sending out information. Santa Monica invested a lot in relaying information over time to our community about changes in local ordinances, programs and services available to help support the community. That really, I think, is a super strong model of how if you want to do outreach, right? That level of outreach imagine that on all kinds of programs. I think that would be the words of advice that I could give is if you have a strong relationship, doesn't mean that you have to like each other, but a strong relationship with your community, it will make the tough times and the challenging debating, I think, a different kind of discourse than if you have no relationship.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Have you found an overlap between like the values that you put forth with the city around communication and like how communication serves you in all other aspects of your life, knowing that this is your specialty, like without getting, home life,
Right.
and friends, like, is there a common thread that kind of draws some of the values that you've put forth?
That's a really good question. And you'd have to ask my husband that question. But yeah, I think so. I think that's...
You don't have to go into the details of all the little things, but generally speaking. Yeah.
Yes, I think so. I think it's really important. That's, at least for me personally, a really important part of who I am. I have, a husband, I've got kids. I spend a lot of time at work. And if I'm going to spend that time, I know you're a new parent too, outside of your family and the things that matter to you most from a personal perspective, you have to be able to infuse who you are into your work and, draw some lines in the sand of what you're doing and how you want to do it. So I think for me, how I wanted to do the work was, with that kindness and with that empathy, with the approach that just because you haven't participated before doesn't mean your opinion matters less, right? So we talked you started the conversation around marginalized communities, right? I'm a first generation Korean American, and I grew up in a family where my parents relied on me and my sisters to help interpret things. And so, I think those voices matter. And, I think there's a lot of room for growth in reaching out to people who don't have access to a computer, for the first 12 hours of your day, right? They might be out working in different areas, and English may not be their first language. Those voices and those opinions and how programs and services and policies impact those people matter, because they're like my parents, right? Who came to America and raised their family and voted, but they may not have understood or been able to participate at the level they would have if they were able to receive information in a different way.
Has one of the things that always occurs to me with working in an organization like a city,
sure,
is that there are sometimes things that are inefficient. So, but I'm making a joke of that because sometimes those inefficient things have to be done that way, because the efficiency is not always the answer.
Sure.
When it comes to bureaucracy or when it comes to distributing, say, information by, paper.
Right.
Printing paper
right.
is costly.
Yes, it is
yeah,
costly.
It's way cheaper.
And mailing is costly.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. So whenever you're utilizing services like that, it's a cost center. There's some, I don't know how much the city spends a year on that. You probably do, but you'd say, well, that's the price we're willing to pay for equity. Mm-hmm. How do you make choices like that in those times?
Well, I think look, if there are certain programs and services that the entire community needs to know about and should be out there, those things do require full citywide mailings, right? I think Seascape is one of the main ways that people get information broadly about Santa Monica programs and services and knowing who's new and what's going on at City Hall. I think there's ways to be targeted. We just went through this with, rental assistance, right? So during the pandemic, there was a lot of people who couldn't work or were laid off and needed help to stay housed. And so, with state and federal programming, knowing what's available, who qualifies, some could argue that needed to be citywide. There's also other ways when there's limited budgets. You look at people who are in rent-controlled apartments. You look at things, other databases that give you a more targeted list and might be able to get the information into the hands of people who need it the most. And you still are able to make that impact and that difference. Yeah. So I think knowing when to invest and how to invest and use the resources that you have in the most beneficial way is an important part of equity, right? When do you translate? Like, I'm a huge proponent of translating in as many languages as you possibly can with as much as you possibly can. But that may not always be the reality, whether it's time or money or, space even. So, you have to think about the tools that you have and allocate the resources to make the most impact on the areas with the people that need it the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well said.
That's strategic, targeted communication.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And it's a interesting line to walk too, because, and I know, and sometimes I'll say it's not even, I like picking up a paper.
Yes.
Sometimes people, what you do by sending them the mail is you offset their normal routine.
Right.
You're like, oh, wow, this looks interesting, like the one paper I'll read, or
sure.
Right? I get the sea breeze. Everything else comes to me in my email.
Sure.
So this is sort of a fun approach as well. I could add even fun and unique to the idea of some of those things.
I think multi-channel communications is important, So if you start to see things and your preference is to get emails, but you also now once a month or however often read an article in Seascape, now you've and it's slightly different information.
Right.
Maybe one's more detailed than the other. It may change and build your understanding of something. So what you get in a tweet is going to be very different than what you get in a blog or in an article in Seascape.
What would you say is the most effective medium that you've used?
Oh gosh, I don't know that you can. I don't know that I could say there's any one most effective, and it depends on what you mean by effective, right?
Maybe like which reaches the most amount of people. Yeah. Which one let's start with that. Which one reaches the most amount of people, would you say?
That I can track?
Yeah.
Is our email newsletter that we built. I mean, we did not have a citywide email newsletter. And we know that some people love Seascape and some people don't ever open Seascape. And so if digital is your format, I mean, we know that goes out to, 40,000 residents' email addresses.
Yeah.
And we know what the open rates are, right?
Yeah.
So we know that about 40% open rate. That's really high, right?
Yeah.
That means that, you're reaching.
One of those is me.
A good, and then you can look at click-throughs and you can see which articles people are most interested in, what information, how many people are coming through certain channels to be able to access that information.
Mm-hmm.
The next step is then figuring out how to double down on that, right? And so I think that there's also, that's where marketing comes into play.
Right.
And I think that's another area of potential growth for the city, is really tracking those metrics, and not in the name of swaying, right? Because there's a lot of people who feel really strongly about whether government should be doing that kind of work, but using technology and data to then make better decisions on how to allocate resources and how people are accessing information can be a very powerful tool.
Yeah. There's a lot of these tools out there.
There's a lot of tools out there, a lot of understanding. We use it. I mean, all of us use it in our daily lives, right? Digital has kind of taken over how we live our lives every day.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember a day where I didn't, actually I can. I can remember a day where I did not use an app to purchase something. I didn't use a digital map to find my way somewhere, right? Digital has our reliance. We used to use like paper maps, and you used to like find it on a grid and then have to chart your course on how you're going to find someone's house or a business, right? The white pages. That's not how we think. It's not how we act. And it's not, we don't take the time to do that kind of research anymore. It's all at your fingertips. And so I think government can become that accessible, but it takes time. It takes investment.
Mm-hmm. It's always nice to see. I always love to see when a government's doing things that normally I would expect from like a private company, especially on like marketing tactics and stuff like that. And which is probably a good segue into a little bit around public-private partnerships. Are there any that are significant that are worth mentioning in terms of how you've done some of the strategic communications or in general around
yeah,
that?
I think again, there's so much opportunity there because Santa Monica is such a dynamic place, and it has so many great companies, so many great private residents in the city, and government can't do everything on its own, right? So public-private partnerships, I think, is one way to fill some of those gaps that government can't fill on its own. The last 2 years that I was with the city, we created a We Are Santa Monica advisory board. And that was a board that is advisory to the city manager, but has management duties over the We Are Santa Monica fund. And that fund was set up during COVID in response to the pandemic, but really has the ability to live beyond that and fill some of the greatest needs in the community that government can't do by itself, and that maybe grants and other types of federal aid may not be able to fill, right? So we were able to raise $1.3 million in a short period of time. That's very generous. It's all private donations from the community. I think there's a lot more potential out there. And then allocating those funds to things that can be done quicker and maybe more effectively by local nonprofits is one way that public-private partnership could really grow in our community and do some really good things that government maybe has some limitations on. Yeah. So I hope that they'll continue to invest in that.
Yeah.
And I'll be supporting as a private citizen now.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah. Where are some of what do you think's in the way of moving that forward more?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we were focused on too, as far as public-private partnerships, is the Virginia Avenue Park Community Kitchen. Right. This is a project that came out of the work the Wellbeing group conducted in asking the community, what do you need? And entrepreneurship is a way to change the trajectory of people's lives and their families' lives for generations. And so having a community kitchen and allowing people to grow in food service without following that traditional model of, you have to lease a space, it's very expensive, you hire a lot of staff, you have to invest in all of that overhead. Having the ability to have a space like that, I think can make a huge difference in people's lives. And so finding ways to fund programs like that may not be in the city's budget necessarily, is one way that I think public-private partnerships can be a tangible way to improve people's lives in our community and create some more of that equity that we so desperately need. Yeah.
Right. I imagine it's easier to do that with a nonprofit.
Yes, but donors can be for profit, right? I think there's lots of big, well-funded companies in our community and beyond, right? We always think about our 8.3 square miles, but we're surrounded by LA. And, I think this definition of community, right, we should take a hard look at that. And yes, there are some things that belong just in Santa Monica, and we have to prioritize our community. But, we take part of the greater Los Angeles area, and the greater Los Angeles area takes part in Santa Monica. And I think creating different kinds of symbiotic relationships that kind of break the traditional mold of our 8.3 square miles has to take care of just our 8.3 square miles is something that we should be taking a different look at.
Sure.
A lot of our issues don't have boundaries. Traffic, homelessness, safety, those things, cut through the boundaries of where our city boundaries start and end, right? So I think having those symbiotic relationships are important. I think public-private partnerships in our community and beyond. There's so much that happens in Santa Monica that isn't just Santa Monica centric, right? Yeah. We just hosted, Super Bowl coverage on our pier. That's not just for our community. That's for the whole world to see, right? You've got stuff coming down the pike with the Olympics. I mean, there's benefit because we reap the benefit of welcoming the rest of the world into the community. So if that's a value to the greater Los Angeles area, I think there's a lot of partnerships that can be built from that, and a lot of good that can be, for Santa Monica and then for LA in general. Do you recall any, while you were with Santa Monica, partnerships, even with LA? And is there an opportunity to do that you see now that you'd love to, like, here's a great thing that Santa Monica and LA could very, very immediately. I mean, homelessness is such a big one. But is there anything top of mind that you're like, that would be a great partnership? Well, it's a good question. There's probably a lot more, and we probably limit ourselves, at least as a city staff person, to the things that you think could happen. But if we were to blow, that apart and just say like anything, I mean, I'd say everything, right? When you're talking about, you said homelessness, right? Homelessness is not a Santa Monica issue. It's a global issue, right? And when you think about it from a local level all the way up to state and national level, there's lots of partnerships. When we look at what models work in other areas, I think there's stuff that we can learn, and then vice versa, right? So I think those types of partnerships can really help, open our eyes and not just be so Santa Monica centric. And then I think it's also beneficial for us to share our knowledge and our experience with, cities and places beyond that are facing a lot of the same challenges we are, may not have the same access to resources that we do. Santa Monica is a very fortunate place. And, I know we've gone through a lot of challenges in the last couple of years, but it's still one of the best places that you could ever want to be in Southern California. So I think we have a lot to offer to the rest of the world. We do. Mm-hmm. So to all those listening, we would like to help. We would like to help. I hope so. We have to help each other. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. There's a balance in all these things. It's one of the things that I've also seen, that every time I think there's one, anytime you can see the outcome of something and how you would get there, there seems to be another side of a different approach. And if you take that approach, then some people will struggle or not like the approach.
and you are constantly having to balance the needs of everybody. It's very challenging.
It is, but I think that's why public service is hard, but it's also the most rewarding. It's not driven by. I think it has to be a commitment you make to yourself that you want to be in public service. To want to always strive for that, even if it's maybe not possible to attain.
Right.
But that has to be the North Star, right? Like you always want to be able to engage as many people, reach as many people, inform as many people. And then hopefully that creates enough voices and enough opinions that you can make a decision and people can feel good about it, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of democracy.
It is. You know, and if you think about democracy in that way, then to kind of bring it back, you'd think that if people supported a democracy, and let's just say something was 50-50 or close to that, right, on any vote or any issue, and you were an advocate of democracy, then you would potentially be able to accept, under at least some circumstances, that wow, that was obviously a lot of people feel differently than I do, and I believe in democracy. So here we are, and in a city like Santa Monica where every vote counts. Well, for public voting,
vote counts,
right?
Yeah.
Inarguably, for the most part, I'd imagine it's pretty straightforward. You vote, it counts, and we try, and it's a check, and it goes on the tally. For the most part,
I think so, but I also think, you know, it's not the end of the story. If you lose one vote on an issue, it doesn't mean that that's done forever. Sometimes there are opportunities to learn from those decisions and then continue to evolve the way you think, and then also maybe have an impact down the road when that type of decision comes up again, right? I think, you know, that's part of evolution is you make a decision, you apply it, you learn from it, and then hopefully the next time around, you know, you know we either got it right or we need to make some tweaks, or we completely got it wrong and we need to try something different, right? That iterative approach, I think, is so important when you're talking about, you know, impacting people's lives and livelihoods. So, I mean, but that also takes, it factors in risk. It factors in, you know, a lot of other things that government can't always afford to do, you know? So, again, it goes back to relationships. If you know we're trying something, it may work, it may not. But our commitment is to continue to learn and adjust. I think that is the basis of a really good democracy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're grateful for your time here at Santa Monica. So thank you for your service.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful ride. I hope, you know, who knows what will happen down the road, but it's been an honor to serve the community, and I hope I'll find other ways to do that.
You probably don't get enough as many thank yous as everyone should be thanking you for, you know, people don't know how tough public service is. It is relatively thankless. And very often people are striving to do their best to accommodate everybody's needs. So it's like, you know, when you get involved in that path, you have to take on the emotional capacity of knowing that there'll be some upset people sometimes. Right. And that's hard. I know for me, has it been hard for you in that way? Has that happened?
Yeah. I mean, for someone like me, anytime I can make 100 people happy, but the one person I didn't make happy, that's the one that sticks out in my head. Right. But, you know, you have to balance that, know that if I made 100 people happy, then that was a job well done. And always then have your eye on how you can improve to maybe get 101 people happy the next time. So, I mean, I think that's part of public service, like you said, always striving to improve that, reach more people, and do better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I encourage everybody in the world to do at least some public service.
Yeah.
And it potentially could help relate to all the people who do it all day.
Yes. I mean, it is, like you said, it can be a thankless job in that way. And I think it's important for the community to remember that the people serving you are also people,
Yeah.
that have feelings and want to do a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now that you're moving on,
Yes.
do you want to tell me a little bit about what's going on and where you're going? And
Sure. So I am going to be starting with a local boutique public affairs agency. Ooh. Might have to do that one again.
Yeah, I feel like it's still a good keeper though, because it's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, Siri had an opinion about it too. I'm going to a local boutique public affairs firm called Elevate. And I'm very excited about it. It's a female-owned local company. It's actually in Santa Monica. They have an office in Sacramento as well, but very excited about going and being able to kind of meld some of my public sector work with private sector work, and still having that government affairs tie. So I'm excited. I'm terrified. But I think being able to kind of meld those two things and still be of public service, but in a private company is a very interesting next step for me. So I'm excited.
Yeah. When was the last time you were with a private company?
Never. I've spent my entire career in either nonprofit or public sector work. So that's why it's a little terrifying.
Oh my goodness. Oh, it's going to be so refreshing.
That's what people say, but it might be, I'm definitely one that feels more comfortable playing in the sandbox and knowing what the rules are. But, I'm looking forward. I think the agency I'm going to, I've had the ability to meet a few of my to-be colleagues. Very excited again of working with some really intelligent, committed people and do some really good work. So we'll see, Evan.
Yeah.
Our paths may cross again soon, but
you're not going far.
I'm not going far. They are based in Santa Monica, and again, a lot of staff live in the greater Los Angeles area. So we'll probably see each other walking down the street.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Would you like to leave the community of Santa Monica with a couple last words?
Last words.
Not forever, just for this one thing.
Yeah,
it's not like,
sure.
Yeah.
At least for this chapter.
For this chapter.
I have an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Even though the last couple of years have been super hard, I would say they've also been the most rewarding years because I've been able to work with some great people, work for some great people, and I really hope Santa Monica continues to be the amazing place that it is. And I hope to continue to contribute to it, maybe not as a city employee, but as a private citizen. And it's a special place. So keep it special.
Keep it special.
Keep it special.
Well, thank you for being with me today and spending the time. And
it's been an honor. Thank you for having me.
This was great. Were you able to feel the heat from the fireplace, by the way?
Is that it?
It's right here.
It's the best heat it's
right?
Very nice.
It makes it cozy.
This is what you call a Meyerside.
This is a Meyerside.
This is a Meyerside fireplace.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well,
thank you.
Thank you. And I will speak to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.